So you dry your own herbs, right?
I do.
Can you show us how you made the drying board and what you dry and how you dry it?
Sure.
Okay.
So there's actually two different ways that I dry my herbs. If it's easy to bundle it, like lavender, then a lot of times I'll take the whole stalk, bundle a group together, and then hang them to dry. Yep, so that's my rosemary. I trimmed the bush, and so I decided to just hang dry several of the stems, and that way I could take that off for other uses.
How long do you leave something like the rosemary drying?
Typically, you want to only leave it up for 1 to 2 weeks. Really, it's a case of just testing it to see if it's brittle when you go to snap it. So like this one is totally dry. Since I'm not going to use this rosemary to eat, I was actually planning to use it for making a cold infusion for my hair. I figured it doesn't matter if it's up a little bit longer because I haven't gone into it yet. So I had actually some extra, it's tootle, that I had bought to act as a netting over some plants. It didn't wind up working quite how I wanted it to, and so I had some left over. And so what I wound up doing was taking some scrap wood and cutting it so that I wound up with 4 different frames that would fit the size of the fabric that I had left over.
So the size isn't really that important?
Nope, it really was just a case of this is how much fabric I have, let's make 4 screens, and so just got wood to fit that size.
And this looks like it's a 2x2 and it's cut at a 45-degree angle?
Yes.
And then just screwed on the edges?
Yep.
Basically like a picture frame?
Yes. And then we just...
What's on the underside? Nothing?
Nope. It's just plain wood.
Good.
And we just took the staple gun to staple the netting into place.
Okay.
So for leaves and smaller herbs, a lot of times I don't bundle it just because it's a little bit harder to make sure that the bundle has good airflow, and just trying to corral all those leaves is sometimes hard. So that's why I actually use the screen to dry. And if I need extra airflow, I can always put some blocks underneath it to raise it up so that there's underneath airflow as well. On this screen, I actually have my echinacea petals and echinacea leaves that I'll be saving for echinacea tea. And then over here, I wanted to see, I have lemon thyme, and the leaves are awesome, but it was going to, it was flowering, and so I decided I would snip some of them off, dry it just to see if those also carry the lemony taste, since I use the flowers fresh a lot of times when I'm cooking, or I'll actually take them, clip the flowers off and put them in my salads. So I figured I would test to see if it was something that I wanted to dry for future use, or whether it wasn't quite worth it once they dried super small. So haven't quite decided on that one yet. We'll decide once I taste test. Over here, these leaves are lemon balm. Again, these are for tea, is the main use that I have for them.
About how long does it take to dry the echinacea or the lemon balm?
They're normally dry within about a week to 2 weeks. Lemon balm, if I wanted to, I actually could have bundled and hung to dry from their stems. hanging them upside down. In this case, I just didn't feel like going to that hassle, and I had a screen that was empty, and so I just decided to lay them out since I only had a couple. This plant over here is regular thyme, and so it had been laid out over the whole screen, and then once it was dry, I just kind of shoved it off to the side because I hadn't prepared its jar yet. So that's why it's all kind of in a bundle there. Normally I wouldn't have dried it that way. And then this is actually a comfrey leaf. I accidentally broke it when I was watering in that region, and so I just snapped it off and brought it inside to dry.
What do you use comfrey for?
Comfrey is good for healing. So if I wanted to make like a wash to wash a scratch that I had, I could use that to kind of make a tea and then put that on the wound to promote healing. This screen has different types of basil. This year I bought a seed packet that had probably 12 different varieties of basil in it. So I don't really know what the different types are. I decided that I would dry them, and I've kind of grouped them with the ones that have the purple flowers. And then this type, which was a shorter variety, and it kind of has a pineapple or lemony scent to it when I've crushed it. And so I wanted to keep them separate from just the regular basil that I'm used to seeing. I have heard that it's best not to dry basil, that it keeps better if you freeze it. But actually I heard that after I had already snipped these to dry, so these are going to be dried, and it seems like they did fine. I'll just try and use them up. Once I'm done drying the material, I actually put them, I got a spice rack from Goodwill that had a bunch of these glass jars. So this is my spice rack jar set that I got at Goodwill. Some of them have pre-written, well actually they all come with pre-written labels on them, but some of the labels are to things that I don't use or don't have in the herbal sense. So those I have actually
So that was rosemary, and you have rosemary.
Yes. So this is rosemary that I dried and put in here for kitchen use. So lemon thyme, this is what I've dried so far of it. Lemon thyme is not a common thing in the spice rack, so it didn't have a pre-made label, so I just replaced the black peppercorn since I wasn't going to be growing any of those. Coriander, I actually dried some cilantro and put it in the coriander since they are actually the same plant. Don't know that I liked the dry as much. I'm thinking that in the future I'll freeze the cilantro instead of dry it. But that was one of my trials this year. And then sage. This is actually stevia, which is a sweet leaf, and so my plan is to try mixing it in with some teas to see if it will give that sweetness into the tea when I make it. And then this one, I decided I would try to make my own onion powder, so I actually dehydrated a purple onion, and then once it was dry I blended it in my food processor and put that in here, and so It's pretty good, although it kind of has formed a chunk, which is too bad, but I just have to shake it up and it loosens it for what I need. Dried herbs are better to store in glass just because the airflow is different than plastic. If you store it in plastic, it does have more breathability, and so the potency of your herbs will disappear faster. So it was a really good find to find the set of all of these on its nice little rack, which is awesome to be able to look at it and see a bunch of dried herbs ready for use. So one thing to note, I actually store all of my herbs as their whole leaf instead of powdering them or crushing them up. That actually keeps their flavor a little bit better.
Then you just discard the stems.
Yes. Yep. Once you crush it, it lets out all of those oils that give the flavor. And so I try and store them whole and then just crush them when I'm ready to use them. And that way they have the best flavor even though they're dried.
So you have an urban garden and you've experimented with growing different herbs and things. Is this something that anyone could do, even in the city, in a pot, to grow their own herbs and dry their own herbs?
Absolutely. A lot of the herbs you can grow in a pot on your windowsill. They're pretty hardy plants. One of the important things to keep in mind is if you're going to dry things, you want to do it before they start to flower. So last year I had some herbs and I didn't catch them soon enough, and so I really didn't have a good quality of herb to dry. So this year I'm trying to be more proactive on catching it before it starts to flower and go to seed. But, you know, it really is an experimentation, trial and error type of thing. And as you start the process of growing your own herbs and drying them, as you go through your winter, you'll kind of see what things would have been helpful to have in larger quantities or which things you really didn't need. So, for instance, parsley. I dried parsley and I did use the dried stuff when I didn't feel like going out into the garden, but where I live it actually survived the whole winter, and so I was able to go out and pick fresh parsley, so I didn't need it quite as much, whereas like oregano, the plant was dead, and so I really needed to have the dried oregano in order to use.
Well, thank you very much for showing us this. It
Sure.
was interesting and exciting and makes me want to try it.
My pleasure.